In March of 1990, Toni Danielle Clark is driving across the San Francisco Bay Bridge. What began as a routine drive turns into one of the most mind-boggling, perplexing mysteries I've ever come across, as Toni is involved in a collision amidst the chaos of police and witnesses. Somehow she vanishes into thin air, and what's more, as the dust begins to settle, her mother would receive the most sick and twisted phone call I could imagine. What happened that night? Was this a tragic accident or something more sinister? Join us as we unravel this mystery and explore the disappearance of Toni Danielle Clark. On March 16th, 1990, Toni Danielle Clark, a 17-year-old high school senior, is visiting her cousin on East 19th Street in Oakland, California. As the clock nears midnight, Toni decides to head home. She lives in San Bruno, so it's not too far away, and that night she happens to be driving her boyfriend's Chevrolet Camaro, which at the time had been giving her some engine trouble. Toni drives through the familiar streets of Oakland, making her way to the San Francisco Bay Bridge. The city lights reflected off the calm waters. So as Toni crosses the San Francisco Bay Bridge on her way home, the car stalls again. She gets out to try to restart the engine with no avail. Moments later, around 12:15 a.m., a vehicle driven by Jesse Castaneda, a young man, rear-ends Toni's car. Witnesses at the scene before the accident mentioned seeing Toni looking at her car, seeing what's up, a scene that was all too common on that bridge. The next moments were crucial. Within minutes, police would arrive on scene. The Camaro sat there abandoned, the driver's door still ajar, and the hood propped open. The police began to interview witnesses of the scene and try to piece together the accident, but there was a missing piece. They couldn't find Toni. They were completely perplexed. There had only been a few minutes since the accident occurred, and from what they could put together, witnesses had just saw her at the scene. The officers can't find any sign of the missing teenager. They look to the calm waters below, and ominously, everything is completely still, and immediately grow concerned that Toni might have gone over the bridge into the water and start combing through the entire area. The scene at the bridge was very chaotic. You got flashing lights of the police, you got witnesses, you got traffic, and the fact that it's the middle of the night amplifying kind of the chaos. The police take no chances in that chaos, but within a few minutes, they call the Coast Guard and they start immediately searching the area below the bridge, trying to find if maybe Toni went into the water, maybe she needs rescuing. But as every passing minute goes on, they become completely perplexed. Where was Toni? In the span of minutes, she completely vanished into thin air. News of Toni's accident makes its way to Toni's family, who are immediately plunged into a whirlpool of panic and chaos. Toni's mother was very overwhelmed with fear when she learned that Toni was missing. And I think at that time, everybody probably was worried that Toni had drowned. But as the night wore on, and the minutes and hours went by, the chances of finding Toni alive seemed to dwindle. The officers can't find any sign of the missing teenager. Car keys, her bracelet, her wallet, everything is there. The police realized, at this point, no matter what happened, Toni did not leave that car willingly. They look to the calm waters below, and ominously, everything is completely still. This is completely perplexing, and it's about to get even weirder. So stick around. But first, let's talk a little bit about who Toni was, because she's a pretty cool person, and I want to shine a little bit of light on that. But Toni Danielle Clark is a 17-year-old. She is African-American. She grew up in that Oakland area. She attended Peninsula High School in San Bruno. Toni was described as vibrant, lively, and she had a lot of kind of deep and meaningful relationships. She was close with her family, and she does have a boyfriend at the time. Toni was a dedicated student at her school. So in particular, Toni had a close-knit family. Her mother, Gwen Clark, who was deeply involved in Toni's life, was or has been crucial in her efforts to find Toni and to try and get justice for her. But growing up in that Oakland area, she did definitely have a strong connection to the community and the people that surrounded her. One thing of major significance to this case is that, unbeknownst to her family and friends, Toni and her boyfriend were actually 2 months pregnant at the time of Toni's disappearance. So back to the scene on the bridge, and you had the Coast Guard searching for Toni. The police had actually set up a perimeter And within 6 minutes, the U.S. Coast Guard was on site, dragging the bay and searching for Toni. So there was no time between the accident and the police response. It was so immediate. And at the scene itself, police look around. At this time now, they're so perplexed, especially finding Toni's personal belongings in the car. They get the Coast Guard searching, like I mentioned, and they scour for like physical traces of Toni on the bridge. Is there hair? Is there blood? Is there evidence of a scuffle? Beyond the accidents, they interview Castaneda. Everybody. They still can't put it together. As police continue to interview witnesses, an anomaly pops up. One witness reported seeing, right after the accident, an African-American man looking under the hood of the Camaro and then leaving the scene. Now, this will come back into play later, and you'll see why. So every second at this moment, anyway, is critical. It's just like a full-scale search and rescue mission. The San Francisco Bay Bridge is basically, for those that don't know, it's like 4.5 miles long, and it's built in two major spans, actually, and they meet at this place called Yerba Buena Island. The bridge towers over the deep and often turbulent waters of San Francisco Bay, an area known for strong currents and variable tides. The bridge itself made the search incredibly challenging. Besides the fact that you have all these like tides and currents underneath for the Coast Guard to deal with, the bridge itself is complex. It's got nooks and crannies everywhere, different levels, places that like a body could get stuck in, but it was searched thoroughly. Eventually, the officers expand their search radius, checking down the shorelines and just about anything adjacent to the scene. Again, not a single trace of Toni. So as the night fades into dawn, there is no answers. You've got Toni's family panicked and terrified. You've got the police and Coast Guard completely perplexed. And I can't imagine from Toni's perspective what she would have went through that night. Everybody knows we got a missing 17-year-old and it's time to step up. And they do. They interview, they search, they do everything. But slowly, like with a lot of these cases, the hopes of recovering the person alive start to dwindle. And what would happen next would change the course of the entire investigation, at least in the mind of Toni's family. Approximately a week after Toni's disappearance, her mother, Glenn Clark, would receive a phone call that was only 40 seconds long that would completely change everything for her. The call consisted of a young woman crying desperately on the other end of the line before abruptly cutting off. Gwen was completely convinced that voice on the other end of the line was Toni. Unfortunately, the police weren't able to get a trace on the number. The eerie phone call would introduce an element of terror and horror for Toni's family I cannot possibly imagine. So it's mixed also with a bit of hope that Toni is alive. The inability to trace the call just added layers of hopelessness and frustrations for Gwen and the investigators in the case. But it fueled Glenn's resolve to assert that there's no way her daughter drowned that night and that she was, in fact, kidnapped. And as we dive deeper into this, you'll see that's not the only evidence of this. The police and the media tried to bring attention to this mysterious phone call, but it just didn't take at the time. And I don't know if that unfortunately had to do, like you hear these stories about when African-American people would go missing back in the day, the media doesn't pay attention and the police don't try so hard. It seems like the police were trying pretty hard in this case, but the media maybe didn't want to pick it up. I'm not sure, but from what I can see, it was an issue to get the word out there at the time about her disappearance. And I think that affected the case in a few different ways. Because, like another example in the case, police continue this investigation. They try everything to solve that phone call. They can't do it. They're losing their mind. The other crazy part is that, like I said, witnesses place an African-American man at the scene looking under Toni's hood and around the car and then leaving the scene right before the police showed up. However, the interesting part about that is that To this day, that mysterious man has never been found. The police searched high and low for this guy and even appealed to the public. Yeah, so I can't see how that person isn't avoiding the police, because there's no way that guy didn't put two and two together, even though it was the 90s, like that there was disappearance on the bridge that night that he was at moments before that accident. And the police are turning to the media, turning to everybody to say, hey, we're looking for this dude that was at the bridge this night and seen getting into your vehicle. But lo and behold, they never turn up answers. So it's another dead lead. Is this mystery man, one, does he exist? And two, if he did anything to do with the case? It seems, so you got those two leads that the police have. You have the mysterious man, you have the eerie phone call. It's definitely suggesting that maybe there's some more foul play involved in this than the police originally thought. For the next 18 months, police will relentlessly pursue this case. They turn over every rock. Again, like I said, they tried to get a hold of all these people, go down the road of those phone calls, see if they could rustle up any evidence. And to recap, like, they're thinking that, at the time, like, she could have drowned, she could have been kidnapped, or maybe this guy that rear-ended her just threw her in the water because he just didn't want to get in trouble for maybe being a bad driver, getting a ticket. I don't know, maybe he didn't have insurance. But that part doesn't add up, and you'll see why, as we'll get into. So 18 months after the investigation, police have no leads, but what they do try to do is piece together a manslaughter case against Jesse Castaneda. The police try to basically assert that he was tailgating, speeding, and ignoring traffic signs on the bridge, which essentially led to Toni's death. Now, I want to reiterate, see, the charging with manslaughter, again, which differentiating between they don't think they suspected this guy of murdering Toni or actually throwing her over the bridge, anything like that, but they were trying to assert that she might have fallen into the water, one way or the other, and it was his erratic driving that was like the catalyst of this situation, hence we're going to charge him only with manslaughter. So the police put this forward to basically a prosecutor, and they take it to court. So the trial became a critical moment for the investigation because at the end of it, it ended with a hung jury. They couldn't decide whether or not Jesse Castaneda was guilty of manslaughter. But the interesting part is why. As a result of that hung jury, Jesse's acquitted, but the legal outcome basically is that there's no evidence that Toni's dead. So we can't convict this guy of manslaughter in any way, shape, or form. So now, to complicate this matter even further, you've got a court, I don't want to say affirming what Toni's mom said, but saying, hey, the evidence that this investigation's turned up suggests that we can't determine this person's actually dead. That being said, does that exclude that this guy could have thrown her in the water? Or maybe like he rear-ended the car and she went over? Not necessarily, and that's one of the many theories that we'll get into with this case. But the one that's reiterated time and time again is that foul play was involved. Not on Jesse's part, but just by some kind of sinister person that intended to do Toni harm. So just to reiterate this timeline again, she leaves her cousin's house close to midnight. So we're talking about the span of about 20 minutes from when she leaves her cousin's house to when she's rear-ended. In that time, she broke down, had been seen by witnesses checking her car. She's rear-ended. The police are on the scene within minutes. It's only 6 minutes until the Coast Guard is on scene and searching for Toni down below. How could she fall through all these cracks? How could we have an unidentified man that had access to the crime scene and possibly Toni never be identified to this day? How could there be a phone call that sounds just like Toni to her own mother? I don't know. But like a lot of these things, we turn to the internet for theories and speculations, and we're going to go through a little bit. And seriously, if you got an idea of how she might have disappeared, please let me know. So the first theory that jumps out into my mind is basically that Toni suffered a accidental fall, either as a result of the accident or just when she was walking around next to the car. However, given kind of the area of the crime scene, it seems unlikely. But as mentioned earlier in the story, like there's no physical evidence, there's no hair found on like the guardrails, there's no evidence of blood, even in the river down below. After the Coast Guard's like scouring the entire area, there's no pieces of her clothing or, again, evidence in any way, shape, or form. The area itself is full of there's strong currents and tidal forces in the area, so it's not impossible. Did I just say impossible? It's not impossible that she was swept out to some place where the Coast Guard basically couldn't find her. Okay, so then we have Jesse Castaneda. It seems highly unlikely, given everything we know at this point, that he would have thrown her over the bridge on purpose, given that he stuck around the crime scene and stuff, leading us to basically the main theory is that the unidentified man seen at the crime scene could somehow be involved with Toni's disappearance. Basically, this guy is identified by witnesses being there on scene, taking a look at Toni's car. At the same time, people aren't reporting seeing Toni. So it's possible that maybe this person was offering assistance and says, hey, do you want to come sit in my car? It's the nighttime, it's cold. You go sit in the back seat. And in a moment of opportunity, basically kidnaps or abducts Toni for more sinister purposes. Remember that at the crime scene, the police found that all of Toni's belongings were still sitting on her car seat. So the one thing that's established is Toni didn't plan to go anywhere. When you add another layer of complexity to this, being that her mother receives a phone call that's 40 seconds long that to this day she swears was Toni crying on the other end of the line. Seems like Toni in this case might have been the victim of somebody playing sick games. And I can't imagine what her family or her were going through at that time. Is it possible that it was a prank? Yeah, people are messed up. And for the few people that might have heard of the story of the time, yeah, people might have messed with the family. It happens, unfortunately. I really don't think it was the case. And I think a parent would know their kid's voice on the other end of the line. So along with the more sinister narrative, people have thought that maybe Toni was the victim of an actual serial killer. So during that time, being like the 1980s and 1990s in California, and just FYI, like California has been home to so many serial killers over the years, but specifically in that time and area, two people by the name of the Speed Freak Killers, who got their name basically for their meth-fueled rampage killings, were targeting people on random kind of assaults and then taking the bodies and then burying them outside of the city. So the two guys' names were Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine. And years later, on death row after they've been caught, Shermantine begins making confessions in that typical serial killer fashion to buy more time on death row, saying, I'll give you the areas of different graves or people that I buried. And he says that, hey, in the 90s, I killed a young African-American teenager who was pregnant. So right away, this sets off alarm bells, not only with the investigators, when word eventually gets out to the family, and the police try to corroborate this. They do chase down some leads. Most of the grave sites associated to these killers have been found, and to this day, there's never been any evidence actually linking these two to Toni's death or disappearance. My thoughts on it, they're probably not involved. These guys they got their name, the Speed Freak Killers, for a reason. They were strung out. It's highly unlikely they were able to pull off kidnapping this person with zero witnesses or physical evidence of any kind. It just doesn't seem likely. And the fact that the police didn't find the graves. But it certainly seems that we've seen a lot of different cases where people vanish in the most mysterious ways. And I believe that there is a certain set of criminals out there that are just people that prey upon opportunity. I think of Israel Keys as somebody that did that a lot, but I think that there's people that they're not necessarily serial killers, but they see a young person stranded on the side of the road and they don't think they're going to get caught. It gives them an opportunity to live out some godforsaken dark fantasy. And yeah, I really wonder if that's not what happened in the case of Toni, given that over 20 years has passed, almost 30 years actually, and Not a trace of evidence has ever been found of her drowning. Some people also posit supernatural theories, specifically one of them being abducted by aliens or slipping out of our own reality. Now, obviously, I don't think some of this stuff is true, but it's an interesting point to think that, in a case where you have absolutely no explanation, you can't help but think that there is a paranormal aspect. Was Toni abducted by aliens? I don't think so, but hey, it is possible, especially with everything we know about the universe these days and craziness that goes on. I don't think aliens are considered that crazy anymore. It sounds more like a science fiction movie, but who am I to say otherwise? So that's like a summary of all the theories that are out there, but despite all the theories, speculations, to this day, there's no answers. Police have continued to investigate. Gwen has been pivotal in making sure her story's heard. Anyone that has information on this is encouraged to contact the San Bruno Police Department. The most bleak explanation for this is that Toni drowned that night and was swept out to sea, and we may never know the answers because of it. And if somebody did kidnap her and do something bad to her, they suck. Take care. We'll see you next Wednesday, guys.